She
Okay.
sleeps over where the couch is a kind of a curve.
That's her usual spot, behind the camera.
But Gigi, my cat, likes Barry's voice, and she often cruises by when he starts talking. She goes, "Oh, I have to go by because Barry's here."
Oh dear. You know what? I don't mind.
I know. I think ladies like your voice, Mr. Selby.
I've heard that a couple of times. I'm not complaining.
That's good. That's a good thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
we could talk about that as a subject someday about how effective people's voices are, because I
Hmm.
think that could be a very interesting,
Oh, we
very
can get into stuff about that, about laughter, everything else. Anyway,
yeah.
this week's topic
So
we'll talk about this
this
week.
week's
Yes.
topic on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, the internet's #1 singles talk network. And this is Let's Talk Dating with Christine and Barry. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Christine.
And 2 weeks ago, we talked about how to have a conscious argument. And
Hmm.
last week, we talked about how to consciously apologize. And this week, we're talking about how to win an argument. And I also want to say, Avi, so
Well,
that you don't feel like you lose an argument, or how not
yes.
to lose an argument. Sorry,
Yeah,
we
it's not because the thing is, how to win an argument may be a different
yeah,
conversation than what we're going to talk
yeah.
about here.
How to
So,
not lose an argument.
yeah,
Yeah, I
there we
thought,
go.
oh, that's such a good title. And then I usually have my phone in front of me. Cece's so good, she puts it up. Yes, how not to lose an argument. So,
Hmm.
wow, let's start with what feels like losing.
Well, the
What
thing is,
feels
first
like
of all, also let me say something else. The title actually says "How Not to Lose in an Argument." That's a whole difference right there.
I read
Yeah.
it completely wrong from the beginning. Geez,
So
that
we've got
was
lots
going too fast, huh?
of. We can cover this in all different
Yeah,
ways.
in an argument. Oh, yeah. Well, that's really important because it's in the process rather than the end.
It's also about your experience in the argument, not just the back and forth. So there's lots of layers to this because the thing is, the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about how to have a conscious argument was really great for setting the groundwork in place. But one of the presumptions about arguments is that somebody wins, somebody loses. And so this piece is really I want to say second half, but it certainly fits in well with that what we talked about 2 weeks ago because it does fit together well. So if you're listening to this one or watching this one, you haven't watched the episode or listened to the episode from 2 weeks ago, go back and listen to that one first, then come back and listen to this one.
Yes. And also, one of the things we address that I will say again in this podcast is arguing isn't necessarily bad. It's not bad that you've gotten upset. It's not bad that the other person's upset. It's not bad that you're having to talk about something that's upsetting, that's just happened, or you want to happen and it's still not happening.
Mhm.
So often, if you start out thinking this is bad, that's really somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And I've not seen too many people feel like they even win. I think both people often feel like they're losing in the middle because they're so frustrated. And then sometimes people just agree just to get it over with or just leave. And that is no way to feel like you're getting anything accomplished and that
Mhm.
anything better is going to happen about it. And I think that would feel like a terrible loss, that you're now in an argument and you're feeling upset and that there doesn't feel like there's any resolution.
Well, there's a few, how to say this? There's a few approaches to arguments that people bring, sometimes not realizing they're doing it. So
Yeah.
they may bring into an argument the fact they need to just simply get something off their chest, just to vent it and be done with it. And that's not a win or lose. It's like, I just want to make sure you hear it and I'm done. And that can be complete. But then there are people go into arguments to negotiate their status
Yeah.
in a way, to leverage the positioning in that relationship there with somebody because maybe they felt left behind or put down or something else. And by bringing forward an argument, they use it as a methodology from an ego point of view to adjust the perspective they have with the other person.
Yes. And that you're trying to adjust the perspective probably that the other person has of you. You're not seeing me, you're not understanding, you're not hearing you. That's completely wrong. I mean, I think that's a lot of foundational things that happen when people get in an argument,
Right.
that one or both people, and ultimately usually both people in the middle, feel misunderstood, misheard, read, and they've gotten to the point where they think, this can't even happen, or I'm going to just have to give up, or I'm going to have to beat you over the head in order to change this.
Yeah.
And I think what happens too is that you've already felt like you've lost something if you don't feel like the person's listening or caring. So in the middle of the argument, if you already feel one down, what a terrible way to go into an argument. That how would you not feel like you're going to lose by the end? I mean, you can't even hardly get back to neutral.
No, and in fact, the thing about that is when somebody comes into an argument from that perspective, one of the ways they attempt to feel better about themselves is to bring the other person down, so nobody wins. And that's really messy. So, and we covered some of this in the episode a couple of weeks ago, and I want to just include something that I said about myself in the episode, because this will bring in perspective about why this thing about not losing an argument is key for me as well. Is that I had this whole wiring back in my childhood, and I talk about this as something that we all deal with in childhood, some form of programming or belief systems we take on without realizing it. And one of mine is that arguments weren't part of love. And that was why my relationships failed in my late teens, early 20s, because every time there's an argument, I would quit because I presumed if there was an argument, the love must be gone, therefore I would stay. That was kind of my short-circuited logic path I had. And that's from early childhood programming. So the thing with arguments was, it was almost like having an argument meant there was going to be nobody winning, period.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just lose. And so this has been something I've been studying a lot because I didn't want to keep dealing it that way. As this conversation we're having, something that's really relevant too, because as I said, the argument tends to often be ego against ego, which I didn't say that before, but I'm going to bring up now. So it's not usually brought as a constructive way of communicating, because it's something that is caused by an emotional leakage or an emotional overwhelming where the logic isn't being played out. So the thing about arguments is interesting, because sometimes in arguments, one person can be very emotionally driven, one person can be very logically driven, and it can be a very uneven game going on there. So when we're talking about how to not lose an argument, I want to put on the table, one of the pieces is know where you stand and where you're coming from in the argument or in the communication. I'll put it that way, because that's going to play out a big part of this.
Yes, and we talked about that both in the conscious argument and the conscious apologizing. Is what's going on for you?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you upset? What piece is the other person playing, and what piece are you playing, and what's probably in your past that's been touched on or unexplored? Or I love your face, because we're both like, oh yeah, been there and done that, and have the t-shirt to prove it for sure.
Yeah.
If you can stop for a moment and regroup yourself, and maybe the other person can as well, about, wow, why am I this upset? What is it? And how much really has to do with you, because it probably does, and how much has to do with me right now, and how much has to do with old shit. Because often when it's really big, not always, but often, it's really old stuff that has just popped up that you thought you dealt with, or you didn't even know you needed to deal with. And what I think about is, there's so many levels of our emotions, and that if you can catch it at disagreement, because that's one of the key steps before you start arguing, because disagreement means, sounds like we have a different point of view, a different perspective, different thoughts. Yeah. So can we have a calm conversation about, this is my side, and tell me your side? And you could still be really far apart, but the emotions are not making it as messy if you can start with just that you're disagreeing about something. But we just don't. That's not a big thing, and I don't want to talk about it right now, and we're too busy. Well, it does not go away. It just grows. Yeah. And so one of the ways to not feel like you're going to lose in an argument is if you can start at disagreement. Because one of the things I brought up before in our conscious arguing is looking for the annoyance. And then the annoyance isn't always a disagreement. and I think often when we really feel like we've lost in an argument, it's because we have such different perspectives and point of view, and we have gotten past the disagreement and now into, I'm so mad and you're so wrong, and why aren't you understanding how right I am? And nobody's listening to either person's point of view. We're in a disagreement. You might be able to.
Might. Keyword is might.
You know?
But to spin that one on another level,
Yeah.
and this came up in what you're saying, because I definitely agree with that. It's so key. But one of the things that come up as well is when you start getting that emotional rise and the feeling of upset that you want to vent out the person, one of the things we don't usually ask ourselves is that person across from me the person I need to talk to, or argue with, or yell at?
Yeah.
Because frankly, it's one of the missing pieces. Is oftentimes, unfortunately, our spouse becomes the recipient of all the upset we have when it's something to do with our boss, or our children, or a parental thing that happened 20 years ago.
Yep.
But the thing is, because the pot boils over in that moment, they become the unlucky recipient.
Yep.
So one of the things about these arguments is, and it's hard to do for most people because arguments are not usually something you have conscious dominion over. They just get out of hand pretty quickly. Is before you get to that point, especially if you have the point you're saying about disagreement, there's a moment where you can actually consciously choose what to do next before you say, forget it, let go, I'm just going to get you upset, And so sometimes we can look at it and go, right, the argument with this person is not what I want to do because I love this person. I don't want to skewer them with all my vitriol, upset, and pain. Then we go find a therapist to talk to or somebody else to talk to instead, But it's a definitely clear thing about making choices about what we're choosing before we get into that place where we end up in an argument.
Yes. What I've talked about with couples is, how you're hard boiling eggs and there's little bubbles first that the water's getting hot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a tiny bit of simmer, it kind of rolls across, and then there becomes the boil. Yeah. So if you can say, what happens inside of my body when the little bubbles start? When there's like, ooh, yeah, that was uncomfortable. Yeah, I noticed that. And then the rippling across the water is, now you're annoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not thinking very positive, happy thoughts about the other person, whether or not it's them that did it. Your feelings are still getting directed at them. And how does so my solar plexus is such a place for me to pay attention to. And then I've told people, how they say you could put shells up to your ear to hear the ocean? Well, it happens in my head all by itself without any seashells. When I start getting really overwhelmed with upset, it's like the ocean roars in my head and I'm like, ooh, I think we're in the danger zone. So I need to pay attention to my solar plexus before that.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, sadly, this person that we're with, the significant other, we're hopefully at a stage in our relationship where it's as much unconditional love as you can get. We've promised we're going to stay together forever. And the dumping that happens kind of arbitrarily and with such vigor and volume, it's so unfair. It's so unfair. It's not what they're there for.
Right.
And so I think you made such a good point of, is this the person that I'm upset with? Is this really the person? Did they just do a little thing that set me off, or did they do a big thing? And thinking about, do you have tools that you can have a conversation with each other where the other person doesn't have to lose? They don't have to get deflated. They really can be there to support you. I mean, there's that wonderful exercise that you and I know about and have taught about active listening, where one person gets a chance to talk at a time, and then you repeat back what the other person said without having the whole time thinking about what your response is going to be, and you're going to make a really zinger back. And it helps lower so much of what feels really mean to me. It feels mean when I do it. It certainly feels mean when I receive it. That if you have tools to use on your own that either of us could teach, or that you now go talk to a other person, or you bring in a third person, because when it's something old and tender, it's so tempting to just dump it on this precious person that you really love and care about, and want to have them not think really badly of you when you're done with your spewing.
Exactly. In fact, one other way to play that one is, if you, this is kind of back to what 2 weeks ago about conscious argument, is if you are aware you want to get upset, is to ask your partner permission to use them as a sounding board, in a way, to be able to, so as in let them know ahead of time, I just feel so upset, I want to get this out. Do you mind just holding space for me to do that? So that I'm not actually throwing it at them. They're like holding space so I can throw past them, sort of thing. And so in that sense, you don't lose an argument either, because you're not trying to win or lose with your partner. You're just simply getting out your system so you can be at peace again and be calmed down, which is a massive opportunity to transform, to release, to be at peace, to be centered again. So that's another way of playing it, is to really, and this is, again, people don't do this because, again, we talked about having conscious arguments a couple of weeks ago, but this is kind of an extension of that, is that the thing about not losing an argument is presuming that there has to be a winner and a loser in an argument.
Yeah,
of course. So it's learning how to own your space in the conversation argument. So when you get to the point where things are getting more percolated, more rolling boil for the eggs, yeah. You have a better place to respond from versus react from, so that when you do well with your partner, it becomes a communication exchange that isn't based on win, lose, and arguing without clarity or understanding. Yeah. It's having that freedom from that place is huge.
So huge. And to touch again on the active listening, one of the things I have found for me and for my clients is more often than we would admit, we've truly misunderstood. We've misunderstood. When we go to repeat back what they said, it was like, nope, that wasn't what truly wasn't what I said. Now, the other thing that can happen is the other person could say, yes, those are the words I used, and now that I've said them out loud and you've said them back to me, it's not what I mean. Let me rethink it. And boy, that's a technique to learn, to let them do a do-over, because I'm not happy with what they already said, and now they're going to say something different, and I'm all fired up about what they said.
Yeah.
And what's been helpful is that you already know they're not using it. They're not faking. They're not lying. They really are recalibrating, readjusting their thoughts, because they were speaking from a high energy, high upsetness. And they're like, yeah, I really, really don't mean it that way. I know I said that. Let me restate it. And boy, to let it go and go, okay, but I was really fired up to make that answer.
It's almost like saying, you've got this energy, I want to use it up.
For sure. Like, you turned up the fire a lot on the stove.
Exactly.
But if really the goal is to have nobody feel like they've lost.
Right.
Because if you care about this person that you are going to have a disagreement with that might escalate to an argument, what are you going to do after? What is your goal after? Do you want to still feel close to them? Do you want to still sleep with them, have sex with them, go on vacation with them? Because if one or both people feel like they lost, there is no way that there isn't going to be resentment. Guaranteed. No. One or both people are going to have, it's not going away. It's going to be resentment. It's an automatic gift that you get when you feel like you lost.
Exactly. There's no fun in the makeup sex either, so it's definitely not worth it.
No, which is really sad, because makeup sex can be really fun.
I didn't know anything about that early on because I kept breaking up my partners.
You said that. I thought, oh, poor Barry. I'm glad you know that now. It's not to encourage people to have fights.
No.
Yeah, you can have wonderful sex without fighting.
Exactly.
And what happens is, I have met a few people who say they don't fight. So then I ask them, well, do you have disagreements? Yeah. Well, how do you deal with those? And they would never put them in, and I wouldn't put them in the category of fighting when I listen to them. It's not really an argument because they've learned to have a conversation when it's still a disagreement, when it's still just the little bit of simmer of the water. They haven't, interesting, love that they didn't get to the boiling point at all. And it's been interesting to talk to a few people that have just knew how to do it. It amazes me because I sure had to learn it. So it felt the hard way to me. So they'll say, oh, we never fight. But ask more about how they get past disagreements. Because if you have two adults living in the same four walls, how would that ever not happen? You know, I told you guys, I am this happy, merry person until I haven't had enough sleep or enough to eat, or horrible if it's both. And I can be a pain. I can be a pain when those things happen in my life. And I've apologized more than once. Oops, sorry. You know, don't listen to my words. I'm just a big grouch today and I'll get myself over it. I'll make sure I have lunch. But it's going to happen. And the misunderstandings and the miscommunication that happens a lot between men and women. So because we grant, okay, it's going to happen, how do you feel like nobody loses? Because then both people are worse off after, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a key part. In fact, I would back it up to say that when you find yourself getting into an argument, you know, we're talking about how not to lose, but also, are you attached to winning? Because in an argument, when there's difference of opinion, you know, are you looking to be right so the other person's wrong? Are you looking to be positioned so that you come off better than the other person does? If you are, what's the reason for that? What's driving that? Why are you feeling the motivation for that? Rather than you're upset about something and you didn't communicate very clearly. Now you have to put it more loudly. Hopefully they'll get through the other person. But is it their fault they didn't hear it, or your fault for not telling it the right way? Because what you said earlier about the couple, it's like, this thing is, if you catch it early enough where you notice the diversion away from neutrality and centeredness, how far down the separation path do you go before you go, hang on a second, I think we're missing something. Let's talk now before we get into the emotional rapids and get swept away by the emotional upset. So this thing with arguments, how not to lose, and also how to be in a healthy argument, is recognizing that you don't have to have a winner and loser in the argument. Mm-hmm. Because one of the ways not to lose is to not try to be the winner, so the other person doesn't have to lose either, and vice versa. So yeah, absolutely vital for that one.
And if both people, I love that, because if both people's goal is to come out with both people intact,
yes,
then we'll work harder to not be so right.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a long time ago, there was Dr. Tony Grant was on the radio before there were any other radio psychologists. And her big thing was, she said it to women. I don't remember her ever saying it to a guy. Do you want to be right or do you want to be loved?
Right. There you go.
Mm-hmm. The whole right thing.
Mm-hmm.
My opinion is the right one. My way is the right one. It sets you up for having not very calm, happy life if you're always having to be right with everybody around you, because they acquiesce or they try arguing back or they leave. I mean, mm-hmm. How can that be lovely? How can that be loving? How can that feel caring about the other person? So I always loved when she'd say that, because the women go, because it really hit them where they live. You know, right. The funny things I'll say to people, because I say, if somebody wants to load my dishwasher, I give them no instruction. If they ask, I'm happy to say this is the way that I think it works well, but you can put them anywhere you want, because I think it's lovely that you put. But there's a lot of people that would never, ever, ever let somebody load their dishwasher because they wouldn't do it right. They wouldn't do it the right way. And there's this huge problem if they're not putting the dishes in the dishwasher the right way. And I know that's kind of minor, but I think it's indicative of what happens in every argument in their life, where they have to be so right. And mm-hmm. I am not saying it's all women. I think men have the same challenge of feeling challenged, but my opinion's not being respected, and nobody's really appreciating me, and the woman's going, but he doesn't understand me. And so we all think have lots of righteousness to be angry.
Yep.
But how do you feel after? I mean, do you really feel like you won? No.
That is the challenge, I think, for a lot of people, is that people go into arguments without looking at what the outcome would be. And so they don't necessarily go into an argument considering the damage they may cause or receive. And also that when the argument's over, the wreckage and aftermath that might happen because of it. I mean, it's also like that for a lot of people. The argument's so overwhelming, they went so far down the road that they have no way of turning back because they've done such damage to each other by arguments and such like that. That's one reason I think the mediation is such a needed part of that separation process rather than divorce attorneys, because for a lot of times divorces are done because the people can't communicate anymore because they burn each other so many times. They don't trust the words coming out of the person's mouth. So that way nobody wins, everyone loses. So this perception of having arguments, period, is a little bit stacked in favor of separation and losing, or as you said, right or loving. That delineation is so key. So I'm of the mind definitely with having the heavier conversations, for one inverted term. Mm-hmm. It's worth looking at what am I feeling early on when I feel out of alignment or discord or upset the other person, that I need to clean things up and figure things out. And it's just not easy to figure out what that is. And so it's so vital to have awareness for your own process before you get there, so you can communicate clearly and have what you want. Sorry, yes. Carl, I'm going off in the background if you can hear it.
Yeah. That's what happens when we're on live, right?
Yeah, and especially when it's so warm out, with the windows open, so you hear things outside the house.
And you think about, I love that happened, because when I talked about how my body starts feeling, what alarm bells go off inside of you, that you're getting, I love that. You're getting out of control. Because when I've worked with couples, I have to hear one, at least, if not both, okay, I really want to see if we can work this out. It's pretty far gone and we're pretty upset, and I want to give it a go. I really want to see if we can work this out, because I still care about the other person. I mean, if they've completely cut themselves off from each other and they're completely emotionally void, they don't love them anymore, they don't value them anymore, they don't feel connected anymore, there's nothing. And usually there's a whole process that gets them there. And, you and I are like, could we just get involved earlier? Which is why I love that they do. I mean, a lot of the lawyers have mediators that are part of their office, family law people that do keep people together and then help people separate and divorce, that they offer that as part of their service. And boy, I wish more people would take advantage of it. A therapist, a coach, because we're not involved in your relationship. We're not emotionally attached to what's going on. And if we're very professional, even if you talk about something that's maybe our stuff that we're working on, we can stay over here about it and help you. And especially if it's something we've gone through, which you and I've talked about how many things in our personal life we've gone through that we're so happy to teach other people that are in the midst of it to go, Indeed. Oh yeah, I know how this feels and it's really sucky. And boy, I wish I'd known this then. And I'm so glad I know it now. And let me teach you so that, and I've even had a couple of couples that ended up saying, yeah, because they really hadn't had this conversation ahead of time before they got together. And now the differences were too different. That was really the big, and so it's like, well, yeah, we're not going to stay together because there's no way that we're going to make the shift.
Right.
And it doesn't make either of us wrong or bad. And it would be really not good for us to stay together. We might even be able to stay friends better, which is what happened with my first marriage. We went back to being friends. It was so much better than being married to each other. We were so wrong for each other, young and stupid and getting out of the house. It was so wrong. But we ended up liking each other afterwards. It was fascinating. Our friends are all like, I've never seen anybody get divorced like that, because we were just so wrong at being together. So that's happened a couple of times, and nobody felt bad about it. They were like, oh, this is why I felt miserable. This is why I was making you miserable. We're just not a match for being married. So
Right.
I love that, which is why I tell people, if you're ready to make a commitment, if you're going to get married, or you think, okay, we're going to stay together, do some sort of pre-married counseling. It's only called that. I wish it was pre-committed relationship, but they don't have that.
Yeah,
But they have questionnaires you can start with on the internet, and certainly hire a professional, because we don't ask those questions ahead of time. And that is often when we are feeling one up on the other person and that somebody needs to lose, because we're coming from such a different perspective. And sometimes you can work it out, and sometimes it's like, I think you like each other a lot and you got a lot of chemistry, but I don't think this is going to be a forever thing. And isn't it good to know before you've sold your house and moved in with somebody and had kids? And I mean, really, it's so much better to know ahead of time. And if you're not going to ask those questions because they're not very romantic, then involve another person.
That is such a vital and useful thing to learn. I mean, frankly, we've done a show about how to start off a healthy relationship. And I think that would be one of the pieces of the puzzle that's so key to know when you're getting into it, what you're getting in for and why you're doing it. Powerful piece, because that also will shift the default around if you're having arguments or not, because you have a better chance if you already know each other going in from the beginning. But boy, some relationships can be different if they saw us before they got together.
Wouldn't that be the best? I know. Because even with the best intentions, even if you're a good match, the opportunity to have these misunderstandings that escalate and to have challenges that you got things that are coming up inside of you, to get a chance to address them as you're going into your relationship. Because I've had 3 clients this week that are in relationships, and I just wait, I know stuff's going to come up. I mean, we've talked about a lot of stuff at it, and they're like, this came up and I was really upset and blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, this is the good and bad news about when you're getting really comfortable in a relationship. There's some old thing that you didn't even know about, or you thought you'd already addressed. And now it's like, yay, I'm going to come up and get fixed.
Exactly.
And they all go, this is not fun. I go, I know. I've had it happen enough in my life. I go, I know the feeling about, but it was everything was so good. Why did this come up? Because everything was so good.
Right.
So if you have an ongoing relationship with somebody you can go back to, or you've already got some great tools that you're like, oh, right, it's that thing again. This is what we're going to do with each other. Then usually people don't feel like they lose when a problem comes up, a disagreement comes up, you end up in an argument. They're like, oh, we're doing that stupid normal thing again. And then it doesn't feel like this is the end, because that's what they think. Oh my gosh, are we over? And
right.
do they think I'm horrible? Do I think they're horrible? Lots of times not at all.
No. Again, it's like saying my experience definitely was early on that every time it would get an argument, it would end. So I look back in my past relationships with sadness, going, if I'd only known differently. So the idea of knowing up front, which is why I'm so passionate about this work too, and why I love to work with my clients, prepare for healthy relationships, so that arguments just become a clue or an indication of just course corrections in the relationship versus the ending and destruction of the relationship. One of the things I want to also jump into as well, because I know we both know this one, about how men and women get upset differently.
Oh, yeah.
And so they argue is very different too.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about this before. I mean, we both started with Alison Armstrong. And one of the things that I remember vividly about her talking about arguments is when a woman was upset, and it's not, I don't know what percentage of this it's going to be, but certainly a large proportion of the time when a woman's upset, it's actually nothing to do with the man directly. He's part of it, but he's not all of it, because she's accumulated so many different things that she's gotten inside that are upset. As Alison Armstrong calls it, the rage monster comes out. And basically she wants to vent and release. And because men are wired to fix things, as we talked about this before, because it's again Alison's work, we don't learn the power of just being present and just holding space when our woman is upset. Mm-hmm. When we understand that her upset is not something we need to do anything about, it's not about us, and we don't have to do anything except just hold space, it changes everything. Because for one thing, the argument doesn't end the relationship. It becomes a vehicle to let off steam in a way. And that's basically what it is for a woman, is allowing her to just to get all that pressure out so she can calm down again. Not that we want to tell her to calm down, because that's a dangerous thing to say. But the recognition is that's where it's heading. If we simply just hold the space and be present to her, not run away or not tune out, just to be present. I mean, actually tuning out isn't that bad either, but frankly, just being present with her when she's upset. And yes, there may be some hooks in there, because that's to prove her awake. That may be thrown at us to hook into us, but it's not all about us. You know, it's about the car dealer or the school teacher or the clerk at the retail store or something else. There's going to be 17,000 things that she's collectively put in a bucket of upset that's gotten so full it needs to be emptied out.
Mm-hmm.
And our job isn't to try to fix any of that or to take responsibility for it, because we didn't do most of that. So one of the keys about not losing an argument is recognizing, as a man in an argument, oftentimes it isn't all of our fault. So we don't need to do anything to defend anything or act differently or to dominate and fight the partner on it, to say that wasn't our fault. It's like, she knows it, we know it, stop arguing about it, just be present to it, you know?
So important. And that you do, as men, want to make us feel better. And your way of normally wanting to help us feel better is to offer us a solution. Right. And what I keep assuring men is, if you just let us vent, because often the words that we use as women is, I'm so overwhelmed. And then we're going to give you the laundry list of what's, and yeah, we took them on. Yeah, we don't have good filtering. Yeah, we say yes too many times. We're not as good at sorting out our lives as you guys are. You're much better at looking at what's the return and do you have energy for it? And we just don't. It's part of our DNA. That extra X in our chromosome made us just give everything away to our detriment. So what happens when you listen and we unload all this overwhelm and we just go blah, 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 and the terrible and horrible and oh, it's so much and we feel better because we've unloaded all that. And you're now the solution. That was the solution. You listened and your goal was to have us feel better. We really do feel better. And you were the reason. So you want us to think you're really good that you helped. We will think you're really good because you helped by listening, which is so counterintuitive to men. Yes. So then I'm going to speak about men, because you got to speak about women, that when generally men are really upset, they generally, for a bunch of reasons, want to go away and think about it and work it out. They realize they're bigger and stronger than us. They have heard us say so many times, don't yell. And you don't think you're yelling, but if you raise your voice any volume or any octave, we're like, he's yelling at me. Don't yell at me. So you want to prevent that because you're a good guy and you care about us. And we generally, as women, as we've been overwhelming ourselves, have been thinking about this thing and processed it and had lots of arguments and conversations in our head and with our girlfriends. And often for the man, you've thought about it, but you don't really have the solution. And if we're not being receptive, it's just going to be a trigger. And now you're going to be mad. And now you have to think about the next step of the solution, just because that's how your brain works, being more single focused. And what works for men is to go do something else. Go fix the car, jog around the block, watch your sports, read the newspaper. And what's really hard, because hard for men, you're going to offer the solution. We're like, no, you have to stay here and talk about your feelings. You'll feel so much better if you talk about your feelings. And partly we're going, I'll feel better if I no. And he's not running away. He's not being argumentative. He's not being obstinate. He's saying, for me to be my best self in this discussion, I'm going to need to leave. And then you have an agreement before the argument that you go, oh, I now know, I've heard Christine and Barry talk about, you're going to need to leave. Could we have an agreement about how long? So that in the heat of the moment, you're like, I have to step away. And it's going to be for 10 minutes or it's going to be for half an hour. I'll get back to you in an hour. And then you need to come back within that time, because otherwise even the most secure women will feel abandoned because our feelings are still there and you're not addressing them. And we want to make you feel better. And we know you'll feel better if you talk about them, which isn't the truth. So here's how both people get to support the other person and ultimately yourself in these really different ways. And it's really counterintuitive for both of us to do the thing that's right for the other person, kind of like the love languages. You're like, oh, I don't even need this, and why would I do that? But this is what the other person needs. This
Yeah.
is how you do arguments and disagreements with men and women that you would not know on your own without somebody teaching you. Because we didn't, right, Barry? We just did it all wrong in the beginning.
That's why I refer to my teachers, because I'm grateful for what they taught me, because I didn't know this automatically. No, I had to learn this from people who knew better than I did. The thing about it, and to get back to the topic title, because I want to keep touching back into that about how not to lose in an argument. When you understand the ways that men and women vent differently, and also what to do in response to that, gives you the power and the authority not to lose in an argument, because you then know, okay, if this is what's going to happen, then this person needs to just, the woman, she just needs to vent it out and get it out. I don't have to do anything to fix it. I just need to be present to her. Great. I won't lose in the argument now, because I know what to do to be effective and supportive and love her through it. For the woman with the man, the other way around, as you said, is that he needs to take himself out of the picture so he doesn't hurt anybody or hurt anything, and he just go and do his thing, maybe, chop wood, go for a hike, run, whatever it is. And then he comes back. So that way she doesn't lose either, because she knows by letting him do that, she's, one, safe, two's been respected, and three's gonna have a nice guy to come back into it afterwards. So for both genders to be really clear and want to really sort of underscore these points is the power of this can change every relationship you have, not just romantic ones, but every relationship. And understanding these modalities of differences means that you don't have to lose, and nobody gets to lose, which is so empowering.
You won't lose by being the support in the way that works for the other person, and they won't lose because if a man keeps interrupting a woman, she'll just get more frustrated. And if a woman keeps insisting that the man stay there and talk about his feelings, he'll just get more frustrated.
Exactly.
And then nobody's winning. I don't care who you are. Nobody's going to feel like they won.
True.
Everybody's going to feel like they lost. All four people, no matter what the mix is, everybody's going to feel bad.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, and that's the thing about arguments. It's not like they're necessary or that they are to be avoided. They're just part of life. And if they happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. But as you've said, and I've said both several times during this talk, is to remember, if you can be ahead of the game by knowing before you get an argument, to let the other person know what you prefer, what will work better for you both as a couple, so that when arguments happen, you're not like going, before I fall in the pit of despair, let me write out my notes. It's like, no. when you're at peace, for example, play this episode for each other. Let each other know. This is something we learned so that we can then do things differently when an argument shows up. Because we're not planning arguments, they show up when they show up. So this way gives you some level of mastery ahead of time and preparation, so you can be more forewarned about how to be responsive in an argument, which is key to winning, basically, or not losing, rather.
Yes. It's laying the groundwork ahead of time. When you're in a good mood and you're having a nice conversation with each other, sometimes we have disagreements and I haven't been happy with how it's working. And have you been happy with it? And maybe there's another way to do it. And I love the idea of playing this to somebody to also listen, because then it gives you all the information to talk with each other. You don't have to remember the ins and outs. You can say, oh, I remember this point, and what do you think of that point? And do you think that would work for you? And I think that would work for me. It could really spark a very fun conversation and waylay some arguments for sure.
Indeed, it could.
And as always, Barry and I would be so thrilled if you wanted to involve us in this growth part for you, because once we both know, once you've learned this, it is amazing how you can have whole conversations with somebody, even heated, and come out with both people feeling pretty okay. And that's kind of shocking, because we've certainly have it the other way for too long.
Indeed, this is a transformational opportunity we're providing here.
It really is.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to talk to me, the best way to reach me is to go to my website, which is www.theperfectcatch.com, and click on What's Holding You Back from Love, and you can have a complimentary conversation with me. And you can also sign up for my newsletter and all my wonderful social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram are also on my website. All the little symbols are there. You just click on them and it'll take you right there. I'm becoming less complicated in my age.
And then you're reporting so much easier to tell people, just go there and you find everything.
Please. And how would they get a hold of you, Mr. Selby?
So they get hold of me is through my website, same as you. I have a website, which in my case, it has my name on it, which is barryselby.com. Again, site's still being developed. So I have my web developer's got something on the project. It's taken a while to get there, but it's getting there slowly. So in the meantime, go to my website. On the homepage on there, you can click on the top link if you want to set up a mini session with me, where you go sit down for half an hour and really get some coaching and get some understanding of where you are and where you want to go. At the bottom of the homepage, you can join my email list, which gives you an email sent to you every week that I send out, plus other occasional special interest stuff. But I do send out these replays in email format, so you can get those as well. All my social media is my name, but frankly, I'm really more active on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So Facebook and YouTube are Barry Selby, which is easy to find me, and Instagram is The Real Barry Selby. And you can check me out on all those platforms.
And every week you can watch us live here on Thursdays at 1 o'clock in Eastern time, at 4 o'clock, and all the times in between. And we love when you watch and you comment and you ask questions. And then please, if you're watching a replay, ask questions and make comments there. And if you have a subject that you'd like us to cover, that'd be perfect. And please share it with any of your friends that are having maybe some challenges in their single life or their relationship life. And also you can find us on all the streaming platforms. We're on Roku and Spotify and Apple and Spreaker and YouTube, everything, everywhere you can take us and watch us and listen to us all day long, every day. You could binge on Let's Talk Dating. And
in fact, if you are listening to us on the podcast platforms like Apple and Spotify, do us a favor and subscribe as well, because you'll let us know where people are actually listening on actively. And if you watch us on YouTube, subscribe and follow us there too, because frankly, the number of people who follow us, we know then how much of an impact we're having. So please do comment, offer suggestions, and let us know if it's working for you, how these lessons go into your life. We'd love to know.
Oh, good point, Barry. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, thanks again for watching us. We'll see you again next week.
See you next week. Take care.
Bye.